How should we live? Today I want to talk about the Buddha's answer to that question. First, I'm going to talk about our relationship to ourselves, drawing on the Kalama Sutta, and then I will talk about our relationships with other people, especially friendship, drawing on the Sigalovada Sutta. So in this first discourse, the Buddha is talking to a group of people, the Kalamas, and one of them says to him, there are all these different religious people, different philosophers, whatever, and they all have different views about how you're supposed to live. One says this, one says that, and I'm perplexed about this. Which one is true? Which one is false? How should I know? The first thing I want you to notice about that as a starting orientation is that you should be able to recognize your own situation in that again. I was stressing this last time when I was talking about Buddhism, that the key to all of this is to be turning to your own experience and being able to recognize the things that are said in these pages sort of from out of yourself. And so, you should recognize that the familiarity of that situation, that, whether you're going to school or whether you're just watching the TV, there are a lot of people who tell you this is the right answer, this is the right answer, this is the right answer. And it makes sense to ask which is right? And the Buddha says the way you answer that is not by looking to some book that says here is the right answer, or finding some authoritative person who says this is the right answer, right? He says, do not accept a thing by recollection, by tradition, by mere report, because it's based on the authority of scriptures, by mere logic. He says the thing you really have to do is pay attention to your own experience and figure it out for yourself. So he says, when you know it for yourselves, that these things, these ways of living are unwholesome, blameworthy, etc., that's when you should reject them. Right? So he's making the point again that I stressed before, and that comes up throughout the Buddha's discourses, that the thing that's really important, the thing that this is really about, is you learning to pay attention to and learn from your own experience. And so, he says, you want to know how to act. Well, let's take greed, hatred, and delusion. What do you think? Is greed helpful? Is it healthy? Is hatred a helpful thing? Is that a healthy attitude? Is it helpful or healthy to be deluded? And, the fellow he's talking to says, no. And the Buddha says, yeah, right. It's not, I think the point is, it's not that hard if you reflect on your own experience to recognize that, of course, greed is not a healthy thing. Of course, hatred is not a healthy thing. Of course, being deluded is not a healthy thing. Right? But you're not going to find any proof of that here. There's no special other thing that's going to be pulled out to say this is the thing that lets you know that that's right. You know that from your own experience. And indeed, if you're even thinking you have to look for proof, that suggests there's a certain kind of dishonesty going on there. But anyway, so he says, what's it like to be greedy or full of hate or deluded? Well, he says, the greedy person being overpowered by greed and having lost control over his mind, or the hateful person being overpowered by hate, having lost control of his mind, or the deluded person being overpowered by delusion and having lost control over his mind, that person is going to go and kill things, kill living things, take what is not given, go with another's life, tell lies. Right? Those things that you can recognize to be manifestly unhealthy states of yourself also lead you to do bad things you shouldn't do, to kill, to steal, to commit adultery, to lie. Right? And again, you're not going to get a proof that those things are bad. Once again, those are the sorts of things that you already know. You know those things are bad. right? And so you don't need to go to some scripture or some famous person to find the answer to these things. You can turn to your own experience and recognize that. But I want to emphasize that one line, right? He says the person, the greedy person or whatever, being overpowered by greed or hatred or delusion and having lost control over his mind, right? The thing about greed, hatred, or delusion is that it's almost like something else is running you, right? And that should remind you of, again, the thing I talked about last time, and the notion of kind of being addicted to things that are liable to birth and so on, and death, and things of this world, right? We get sort of addictively attached to things, and that leads us, and our craving leads us into, an unhealthy life. Well, there's a very similar point being made here, right? That these attitudes of greed, hate, delusion, basically produce a situation where it's as if we're being run by an alien force. We're overpowered by them, and we've lost control over our own minds, right? On the contrary, it says the person who has tried to fix those things, he was talking about, the Buddhist monk or something like that, is someone in whom non-greed arises, non-hatred arises, someone who is not deluded, right? And that person is not overpowered and has control over his mind, right? So the issue in getting rid of these things is, on the one hand, getting rid of a manifestly unhealthy state. On the other hand, stopping yourself from doing bad things, right? Because the monk, the person who has fixed those things, is freed from covetousness and malevolence. It's not somebody who's going to be, trying to get stuff, or, being ill-spirited towards someone else. Someone who's not confused. Someone who's attentive and mindful, with a heart filled with loving kindness, a heart filled with compassion, a heart filled with sympathetic joy, and a heart filled with equanimity. Right? That person has got rid of those bad dispositions, but is now not going to be led into those bad actions. This is a person who will not kill living things, not take what is not given, not go with another's wife, not tell lies. So that's where we want to get to, right? And but notice that getting from the one to the other involves switching this thing from being overpowered by that thing and not having control of your own mind to not being overpowered by it and having control over your own mind, right? In other words, instead of having something else kind of running you, it's more like you're living your own experience, right? You have a certain kind of clarity and sort of self-possession in your experiencing. And so I want to look a little bit at that move, right? How do you get from that being out of control to being in control? Right? Well, as I was saying, the whole thrust of the Buddha's message is you need to pay attention to your own experience, and you need to sort of free yourself from those bonds, right? Remember, you need to renounce attachment and tranquilize dispositions to action, right? That's the thing that's supposed to happen. So I want to talk just a little bit about the process, or sort of the means for that the Buddha refers to. And this is from another discourse called the Greater Discourse on the Foundations of Mindfulness, also in this early Buddhist discourses book. And here, he says, what is it that you're going to do? Well, remember, I said, what you've really got to be doing is learning to sort of notice your own experience. You've got to get out of that automatic thing where you're just wrapped up in the things that are going on in the world, and you're just being drawn along by everything that happens in your familiar ways, right? So that's why the Buddha went out and went into the woods and meditated and so on. Like there's a thing you got to do first, which is like you got to draw back from your absorption in that world you're addicted to that normally just draws you along, right? But so when you draw back, like what are the things then that happen? Well, he says the path to getting under control and so on has 4 foundations, and he says, what are the 4? Well, the bhikkhu, the monk, lives observing the body as body, observing feeling as feeling, observing the mind as mind, and observing mental phenomena as mental phenomena, energetically, self-possessed and mindful, having eliminated both the desire for and the despair over the world. Yeah, so that's where you want to get to to eliminate the desire and despair, and that's the person he's talking about is the person who's accomplished that. But what are the elements of getting there? Well, it's this observing the body as body, observing feeling as feeling, observing the mind as the mind, observing mental phenomena as mental phenomena. Right? The process that's going to lead you to make this transition he's talking about is really a process of learning to pay attention to your own experience. And not just pay attention in a, superficial way, right? So he says you want to be like a skillful turner or a turner's apprentice, because he says a skillful turner or turner's apprentice, when he turns a long turn, knows, I am turning a long turn. When he turns a short turn, he knows, I am turning a short turn, right? So, a person who is skillful at something is aware of what's going on when it happens. You don't just get carried along by a set of actions. The skillful person is the person who's learned to be present to the whole process, right? And so he says that's what you want to do. And he says even so you're going to observe the body as body. Well, that's going to start at the most sort of minimal sort of thing, like taking a breath. You're going to start paying attention to what you're doing when you're breathing. Or he says a little bit later, paying attention to your walking, right? In walking, the bhikkhu knows, I am walking. Or when standing, he knows, I am standing, right? So, paying attention to your own experience means, instead of just being wrapped up in that stuff you always do without noticing, breathing, standing, walking, of course you're still going to do it, but you're going to notice it and you're going to see what it's like, right? And that's you starting to sort of turn on your awareness of yourself. It's starting to awaken to your own experience, right? And that's the thing then that you want to develop and cultivate at all levels. And he says by doing that, he says later he's going to train himself, right? So becoming skillful means starting by noticing, but then becoming trained to recognize that and recognize that well. And you do that until mindfulness becomes established to the extent necessary for knowledge and awareness, right? That becoming mindful is going to be becoming really astute in your awareness of what is going on in your experience, right? And that practicing that process of self-observation and seeing what you're doing in those situations that otherwise just seem to you like the world commanding things from you, right? That's what's going to lead you to be unattached and to grasp after nothing in the world, right? That's what's going to lead you to be able to renounce attachment and tranquilize dispositions to action in order to get rid of craving and so on, and thereby become like the bhikkhu who is not overwhelmed by greed, hatred, and delusion, but on the contrary, is sort of in control of his own mind. So that's the first thing that I wanted to just introduce, was the sort of basic message of the Buddha about how you need to attend to yourself. Basically, sort of what the goal is and what the means are. But I want to draw your attention then to just one other passage from the Discourse to the Kalamas. He says when you're wrapped up in these bad things, you're going to kill living things, take what is not given, go with another's wife, and tell lies, and encourage others to do the same. Whereas the one who has learned to correct that is not going to kill living beings, not take what is not given, not go with another's wife, not tell lies, and encourage others to do the same. So this next thing that I want to emphasize then is the way that our lives aren't just about ourselves, where we're also wrapped up with other people. And so I want to now look at another discourse, the Sigalovada Sutta, to look at healthy and unhealthy relationships with others. So in the second discourse, the Sigalovada Sutta, the Buddha is talking with Sigala, who he says is a householder's son. So, in other words, just an ordinary guy, not a monk or something like that. And this discourse goes through in a more sort of systematic form a number of the things that we already saw in the Kalama Sutta. Because again, he talks about what he calls the four defilements of action, which again are, taking life, taking what's not given, committing adultery, or, as they say here, living wrongly towards sensual pleasure, and speaking falsely. Right? And then again, also they talk about the problem of acting on the basis of those kinds of things, the four problematic motivations for action, which again are desire or greed, hatred and delusion, and then they add motivation by fear here, which we didn't discuss in that last one. So it's very similar material. It's worth comparing, but it's very similar. They add another thing here, which is the 6 causes of waste. And so they give 6 causes, and each one of those leads to 6 dangers. And I think you'll see in the 6s, many 6s, that obviously there's something a little bit forced here, like trying to make sure everything turns out to be 6. Which I suppose has to do with that issue of having a kind of text and a kind of system that people can remember and recite. But, it's still very intelligent, but I don't think 6 is actually a magic number. But in any case, what do they say? Well, they're straightforward things. Like what are the things that where you risk waste? Or what are the causes of waste? Well, indulging in intoxicants that lead you to, sort of laziness and so on. It doesn't mean you never have a reason to have a drink, but it's not that hard to recognize that if you end up shaping your life around getting intoxicated, getting drunk all the time, or getting stoned or whatever, that that's going to lead you to waste money. You're going to get in fights. You're going to get sick. You're going to get a bad reputation. It's not hard to see that as a lifestyle that is taking your life powers and instead of making something out of them, it's going to turn them nowhere. Second cause of waste, he says, going about the street at inappropriate times. I mean, here again, you remember this is an oral text, and it's from centuries and centuries ago. What they're saying, I mean, it's obviously written with a man as the person who's imagined, and what they really mean is abandoning the responsibilities of your home life, right? So it's like they're imagining, a man who's supposed to be at home, with his family, taking care of them. He's ignoring it all the time and just going out. Right? They're saying that's a kind of life. So you might not exactly fit that, whatever 5th century BC picture of family life, but you can grasp that idea of, as a kind of adult living in a way that is always evading your responsibilities. And what that means is your responsibilities aren't going to be taken care of. Okay, he says here, the things that are part of that life, they're not going to be guarded and protected. Right? And you're not doing your job of protecting those things that matter to you. Right? And so that kind of life again it's leading towards waste. Always attending festivals is, again, instead of festivals, you might think parties. Right? But again, the idea is here, somebody who's always thinking about, like, I just want to have a party. I just want to go to a party. And that's the thing that sort of drives you. You get through the day because you're looking forward to a party. If you think of those 3, they kind of fit together, like evading your responsibilities to go out, always looking for a party, building your life around intoxicants. Like, as I said, it doesn't mean you should never do that. But when that is your life plan, like, things are not going in a healthy direction, right? And I think it's not that hard to see that, right? Fourth one, gambling, another cause of waste. The last one, laziness. I mean, they're not that hard to follow. But I want to pick up on the 5th one, which is associating with evil companions. He's saying these are the kinds of things people do. These are the kinds of ways people build their lives, which risk wrecking your life. And associating with evil companions is, I think, a particularly powerful one. It may be that those companions are themselves evil, maybe. But I don't think that's quite the point. I think it's more that as companions, they're doing a poor job. And that then leads into the discussion of the types of friendship. And that's what I think is actually most powerful in this discourse. And so the focus here then is on friendship. And the real thing the Buddha wants to do, and he wants to distinguish between people who merely appear to be friends and people who are true friends. What does that mean? Well, I think it means that there are many people we call our friends, but what we typically mean by that is, I don't know, I guess we like spending time with them. If you go back to what we said before, last time about, it being wrapped up in the things of the world that are liable to birth and death and whatever else, and we talked about sort of being attached and addicted to those things. What we were seeing there is the simple fact that you like something does not automatically mean that it's good for you, right? And so when he's talking about friends, he's really distinguishing between, I think, those people you like to spend time with who are not good for you versus those people who you would spend time with who are good for you. And I think the things he says here are pretty powerful. Once again, the point I've made a number of times, it's not some magic thing that's telling you stuff you don't know. Like, this isn't like saying if you look at certain cells under a microscope, you'll see this. Like, it's not about something you have to go out and do some special experiment with to find out. Like, these things are all more like reminders to you to notice things you can already notice in your experience, though maybe you weren't. Right? But they don't have any way of teaching you something aside from getting you to wake up to what's already happening in your experience. Right? And so the things he says about friends here, again, I think they're relatively straightforward. It's not hard to recognize that they're true. The real work is in attending to your own actual friendships. Right? And so, again, going back to the parallel with the earlier lecture, the earlier material, there he was talking about the way we sort of get addicted and attached to things that are actually unhealthy for us. Well, that's kind of the way he's going to think about friendship here, the ones that are not true friends. He's going to think of them sort of like a kind of addiction, right? Ways in which you have committed yourself and attached yourself to something that's actually kind of dragging you down. Right? And so he says there are 4 types of non-friend. Which he says the friend who merely takes, the friend for whom talk is the highest, the friend who flatters, and the friend who's a spendthrift companion. These are the people who merely appear to be friends. Well, so what are they and why is that? Well, person who first one who merely takes, like what's that? Well, you can have friends who you like to spend time with. You want to be with that person. Let's think about a certain kind of person. Why? Well, maybe it's because it's someone who you think is really good looking, or maybe it's because it's someone who you think is really cool, or something like that. Maybe it's someone who has been sort of aloof, but maybe it's someone who seemed sort of hard to get, and you think, oh, maybe they'd be my friend, right? Sometimes we have a person like that we've kind of elevated in a certain way, and I guess that word craving might come in here. We kind of crave that person, and so if that person then says, sure, I'll hang around with you, we are prepared to give a lot and get very little back. Right? And so he says that, there are kinds of friends who only take, they don't give. There are friends who want much for giving little in return. A lot of us have those people in our lives. And, it's worth noticing that for what it is. He says, what's that friend like again? He says, that's a friend who does duty only out of fear. In other words, sometimes there's a thing that should be done, but that person doesn't spontaneously want to do the good thing or the right thing for you. That person will do what they have to do because they're under some pressure. Like maybe they think they're going to lose their friendship if they don't do this or something like this. But they rise to the occasion only when they feel like they're compelled to. They don't spontaneously try to do the right thing, right? And that fits then with the last one. He says these are people who are really serving only their own interest. So that's a real kind of friend we often have. And he's saying that's not really your friend. That's not really someone who's doing you any good. Second one, the one for whom talk is highest. Talk is highest, in other words, talk not deeds. They don't do anything. So he says that's a person like, they'll always dwell on the past and have stories about how great that is, or they'll talk about the future and the great things they're going to do, you're going to do together. But when it comes time to deal with the thing that actually matters in the present, they're not there. They're not present, right? They will encourage collusion in the useless, right? They will say, "Oh, come on, let's not do that. Like, let's just go get a drink," or if you really are saying, no, it's time to go do that work. We really got to go, fix the garage or dig the garden or whatever it is you're going to do. So you're going to be like, "Oh, I'd like to, but I really hurt myself. I can't do it today. Oh, I would really love to, but I'm sick today. Oh, I have another appointment," right? So he says they'll always point out their misfortune and have an excuse not to be there when the thing needs to be done. So that's another kind of friend, the one who's all talk but will not be there for the deed. The flatterer means the one from whom you get a certain kind of praise, but that's not the same as honest recognition of your value. So that person will go along with you. When you're going to do something bad, that person will say, "Yeah, you're right to do that," right? And so in this case, you're kind of using that person as a way to justify yourself for doing a bad thing. But it's not a person who's going to say, "Oh yeah, here, let's go do that good thing together," right? Or this is a person who will praise you to your face. You like to hang around with this person because they say to you, "Yeah, you're really great, you're really great," even though behind your back, say all kinds of nasty things about you, right? So the point again is that we sometimes choose our friends because of a kind of, we want them to be a kind of mirror for us, telling us the things we want to hear. But, which means we want someone who will say you're good when you're doing bad, and saying you're great, I think you're great, even when they don't. Right? That again, he says, that's not a true friend. And the last one is the spendthrift companion. Again, that's someone who's basically going to encourage you in all those kinds of waste we were sort of already talking about. They're always ready to go drinking with you. They're always ready to say, "Yeah, let's abandon our responsibilities and go out tonight." They're always looking for a party. They're ready to, gamble and deal with all the other lazy pleasures and so on, lazy pastimes. It's not quite the same as the last one, but it's similar in the sense that that's a kind of person we can look for because they will support us in the things that aren't so good. You can want the one who praises you when you're doing bad things, or you can want the one who will go along with you when you want to waste. Right? So this is a thing that should lead you to reflect on your own behavior. Like, I guess to reflect on two things. It means you need to think realistically about the actual people you have as friends and ask yourself, who is that person as a friend? How does that person behave toward me? What values are reflected in that? And you need to ask yourself, and that first one is critical and challenging enough. The second one, I think, is even harder. You have to ask yourself, why am I looking for those people as friends? Why am I choosing those people as friends? So, as with those other issues of, attachment, renouncing attachment and tranquilizing motivations to action and so on that we talked about before, similarly here with respect to friendship, I think the issue is to take ourselves out of that position where we're just rolling along with the things we were already familiar with, the things we already feel like doing, and taking a kind of, stepping back and taking a kind of observational approach to ourselves and looking at what's actually going on here. Just as he said before, the skillful observer, when he's standing, recognizes I am standing. When he's taking a breath, says I am taking a breath. Well, in your dealings with your friends, can you be honest about saying, here is what I am actually doing here? Or maybe, here is what we are actually doing here. But then, he says, they're also true friends. What does it mean for someone to be a true friend? And he says here there are four kinds, right? The helper, the one who remains, the one who shows what is profitable, and the one who is compassionate. And, a real friend is someone who actually cares about you and is there for you. right? And so the helper, the true friend who's a helper, is one who will protect stuff with you, who will take care of your things, who is working with you for what matters to you. That's a person who will be a refuge when you're frightened, right? It's someone you can turn to for support when, in various ways, the world is too challenging, right? And they help you with regard to duty, like both in the sense that they want to do what's right when you want to do it. They want to pitch in with you, but also in the sense that they want to be a good person and they want to do the good things. They don't just do it under pressure, and so they also help you by modeling that. The true friend is one who remains, and I think actually here I think the language of intimacy might be helpful, because I think he's sort of saying this is a person who really becomes intimately connected with you. This is a person, they'll tell you their secrets because they really want to share who they are with you, and they'll keep your secrets. Right? This is a person who won't abandon you when things change their path, things go up and down, or just change, right? And they will also risk things and sacrifice things for you, right? So this is a person who is committed to you, right? And that's then a friend who remains. The friend who shows what is profitable, I think that means really the friend who puts on display what matters, puts on display what is good, right? And that's a person who then, by representing the good, they'll keep you from doing evil and at the same time encourage you to do good. It says they'll declare what one hasn't heard. Like, in other words, they'll protect you from ignorance, from your own ignorance, which can take many forms. And he says they'll point the way to heaven, right? Like they're showing how to be a good person. And lastly, they're compassionate. Yeah, it's somebody who doesn't take pleasure in your misfortune, does rejoice in your good fortune, will restrain others who speak ill of you and say, no, like, he's a good guy. You can't say that bad stuff about him. And on the other hand, when other people say good things about you, that person will say, yes, that's right. You should recognize that is a good person, right? So in sum, then, when we think about going for the people that we like, that can be healthy or unhealthy, depending on what our likes are, right? And so the thing that we often call our friend is often the opposite of a friend. Those people we often think of as our friends are more like people who indulge us in our addictions, to use that same kind of language, right? They encourage us in our bad habits, right? And so, there's really two sides, I guess, to the sort of problem here, right? On the one hand, we're looking just at how we pick our friends and what's involved in those relationships, and we're seeing, this is a kind of an unhealthy choice. But it's also the case that those relationships then go on to shape us, right? We're sinking ourselves into life patterns that can bring us down, right? So it's both, there's a problem both in the sort of values and choices we're bringing as we make those friendships, and problems in what comes out of the fact that we have those friends, because other people encourage us and lead us and kind of make the environment in which it's easy to go one way and hard to go another way, right? And so the one who appears to be a friend but isn't really is the one who actually makes it hard for you to be good but makes it easy for you to be bad in various ways, right? Whereas the true friend is the friend who actually cares about you and whose behavior is actually committed to your good and contributes to your well-being. And I think, there's an awful lot of value in reflecting on the specifics of this analysis and using that to look at our own friendships and think about what's going on there. And I want to just add one more thing, and that's just about where this discourse ends, right? It begins with Sigalo going out to pray or whatever to the compass points, north, south, east, west, and up and down. And the Buddha says, why are you doing that? And he says, well, I'm honoring my father who said I should do that, and so on. And the Buddha says, that's not the way that I think you should honor, so to speak, the compass points, right? And so the end of the discourse, he reinterprets those directions. And, the east is, think of that as your relationship to your mother and father. The South, your relationship to your teachers. The West, your relationship to your wife and child. Again, the discourse kind of assumes a man. The North is your friends and companion, and the nadir is servants, workers, and helpers. The zenith is the religious wanderers and Brahmins, right? So he's taking those compass points and reinterpreting them as human relationships, basically saying these are the real things that our life is or should be oriented around. And he then says, how do we worship them? How do we honor them? And he says, you do it by figuring out essentially what you owe your mother and father, and what mothers and fathers owe children, what you owe your teacher, what the teacher owes the student, right? He interprets all these relationships as things that are or should be essentially relationships of reciprocal compassion. And when I say what do you owe, I don't mean dollars and cents. I mean, if you're going to be a teacher, what is the attitude you really should be having, that role calls for with respect to your students? And it means having compassion for your students, realizing what it is that they're turning to you for and what it is that they need. And, you're a good teacher when you put that on display, when you act out of that. And similarly, you're a good student when you recognize what the teacher is really trying to do, right? And you bring the appropriate things to that. Or same with parent and child, or your relationship to your friends, which we were just talking about. But so I just think that last point is really quite interesting to see this idea that the real compass points in our life are these essential different relations: parent, child, teacher, student, wife and husband, friends and companions, religious people who work for us, and so on. And that we really need to think about honoring those directions, in the sense that we really need to try to ensure about ourselves that we are bringing to each of those the appropriate attitude that demonstrates, compassion for the other person in that other role. I think there's a lot to think about there.